Recording entry 47, universal date 3479.2. Location Earth's Intergalactic University of Sports Sciences, New Zealand campus. I, Praxx Nimbleflick, third-degree scholar of galactic sports history and 7-time champion of zero-G quantum ball, cannot believe the primitiveness of this assignment. My audio sensors are still processing the absurdity of what our professor just announced. As exchange students Professor Amanda Blackwood had said, her strange human mouth forming those peculiar Earth words, you'll each study one traditional Earth sport. Your final project will include a comprehensive analysis and live attendance at a major sporting event. The other alien students in my class, a mix of various species from across the galaxy, buzzed with their usual excitement about anything Earth-related. Honestly, they're so easily impressed. Take my lab partner, Zazzle Brightscale, who practically bounced in her hover seat, her bioluminescent scales glowing that annoying shade of passionate purple. Professor Blackwood Zazzle's translator squeaked. Is it true humans play sports without neural enhancers or anti-gravity assists? The professor smiled, that odd human smile, all teeth, no tentacles. That's correct, Zazzle. Earth sports rely purely on natural physical abilities. I couldn't help but let out a derisive snort through my upper respiratory tract. The entire class turned to look at me, their various sensory organs focused in my direction. Well, if they wanted my expert opinion. Professor, I said, my translator perfectly modulated to convey my academic superiority. I've studied sports across 17 galaxies. Any species that hasn't even developed basic telepathic ball control can hardly be considered serious about athletic competition. Professor Blackwood's expression shifted, that fascinating way human faces move, like living clay. Was that amusement? Pity? These humans are so hard to read. Mr. Nimbleflick, she said, walking closer to my desk, since you're our resident expert, perhaps you'd like to study one of our more physically demanding sports, rugby for instance. Rugby, I flicked through my neural database. Ah, yes, the one where humans deliberately collide with each other while chasing an egg-shaped ball. Hardly seems efficient. A strange sound filled the classroom, human laughter. Even Professor Blackwood was doing it, that peculiar respiratory spasm they claim indicates amusement. Tell you what she said, I'll make you a deal. Study rugby for 1 semester. If you still think it's primitive by the end, I'll personally write you a recommendation for the Advanced Xenosports Academy on Centauri Prime. Now that got my attention. The Centauri Academy? Only the most prestigious sports research facility in the known universe? I activated my smugness glands to their full capacity. Challenge accepted, Professor. Though I must warn you, my analysis will be thorough and unforgiving. I've critiqued the 100-armed wrestling matches of the Betelgeusians. I've written scholarly papers on the plasma surfing techniques of the Andromedans. This, rugby, will be dissected with the same academic rigor. Wonderful. Professor Blackwood clapped her hands, another bizarre human gesture. Your first assignment is to attend the All Blacks training session tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. sharp. 6 a.m. My chromatophores flickered in confusion. But that's when all 3 suns are barely rising. New Zealand has only 1 sun, Mr. Nimbleflick, the professor corrected, her mouth doing that strange upward curve again. And yes, 6 a.m. rugby players, you'll find, are quite dedicated to their primitive sport. As I floated out of the classroom later, my anti-grav stabilizers humming softly, I heard Zazzle behind me. Praxx, she called out, her scales now a concerned shade of blue. Maybe you should research rugby a bit before tomorrow? I heard humans actually break bones playing it. Break bones? I laughed through all 4 of my breathing apparatus. My dear Zazzle, I've analyzed sports played in active volcanoes. How dangerous could a simple Earth game be? Oh, how the universe loves to prove a smug alien wrong. But I didn't know that yet. At that moment, I was still floating high on my own sense of superiority, completely unaware that my entire understanding of sports, humans, and the limits of physical achievement was about to be thoroughly and painfully challenged. If only I'd noticed Professor Blackwood's final expression as I left. That particular human facial arrangement, I would later learn, is called a knowing smirk. The next day, I arrived at the university's grand lecture hall for our more detailed project briefing. My temporal calculations were, as always, perfect exactly 2 minutes before the scheduled start. The hall was already filled with the usual mix of intergalactic students. Zazel's scales were cycling through nervous shades of green and blue as she reviewed historical sports footage on her neural projector. Professor Blackwood strode into the room right on time, carrying what appeared to be ancient Earth artifacts, leather balls of various shapes and sizes. She placed them carefully on her desk, handling them with the kind of reverence usually reserved for quantum relics or black hole fragments. Today, she announced, her voice carrying that peculiar human quality they call passion, we're going to discuss why Earth sports have remained largely unchanged for centuries, despite all our technological advances. I raised my primary appendage, clearly because humans lack the innovation to improve them. The professor picked up one of the leather balls, the oval one. Mr. Nimbleflick, did you know that we've tried introducing advanced technology to rugby? Force fields, impact dampeners, neural assist systems. This was news to me. My secondary brain began processing this unexpected information while my primary one maintained my skeptical expression. And I prompted. They all failed, she said, tossing the ball from hand to hand. Not because they didn't work, but because they fundamentally changed what makes the sport special. Zazel's scales flashed curious yellow. What makes it special, Professor? Professor Blackwood smiled and threw the ball to Zazel, who caught it with her gravitational field. No, the professor said. Catch it with your hands. Zazel deactivated her field, and the ball dropped directly onto her desk with a thud. The class erupted in their strange human-learned laughter. That, Professor Blackwood said, is exactly my point. Earth sports aren't about making things easier or more efficient. They're about pushing the boundaries of what's possible with just your natural abilities. They're about heart, determination, and the raw joy of physical achievement. Surely, I interjected, my smugness glands working overtime, you can't be suggesting that primitive physical contests are somehow superior to our technologically enhanced sports. The professor's eyes, those fascinating fluid-filled orbs humans use for vision, fixed on me with unexpected intensity. Superior? No, different. Absolutely, which is why your next assignment is going to be particularly interesting. She pressed a button, and a holographic image appeared above her desk. It showed humans, massive specimens of their species, crashing into each other with frightening velocity. This is rugby, Mr. Nimbleflick, your chosen sport. And you won't just be studying it, you'll be participating in it. My chromatophores went pale. Participating? Yes. Each student will train with their chosen sports team for 1 week. Don't worry, we've made all the necessary safety arrangements with the New Zealand Rugby Union. They're quite excited to have our first alien player. But my translator glitched as I struggled to form words. The gravitational differences alone have been accounted for, Professor Blackwood finished. Your anti-grav stabilizers will be calibrated to Earth normal. You'll experience rugby exactly as humans do. The hall fell silent. Even Zazel's scales had frozen in a shocked shade of white. Unless the professor continued, that strange expression back on her face, you'd prefer to switch to a different sport, perhaps something less primitive. My third heart skipped a beat. I could feel the eyes of every student on me. My reputation as the galaxy's leading sports scholar hung in the balance. And then my pride, my wonderful, terrible pride, took over. Switch? Hardly, I managed to say, activating my confidence pheromones to mask my growing terror. I look forward to demonstrating how any sufficiently advanced being can master these simple Earth games. Professor Blackwood nodded slowly. Excellent. Report to the Auckland Rugby Club tomorrow morning. Your training kit has been specially modified to fit your physiology. As the class ended and students began filing out, I heard snippets of conversation. Did you see those collisions? No force fields at all. His exoskeleton won't last 5 minutes. I maintained my dignified float all the way to the door, where Professor Blackwood stopped me. One more thing, Mr. Nimbleflick, she said quietly. The team has a tradition for new players. They call it the welcome tackle. I'd recommend studying up on proper falling techniques tonight. My color camouflage involuntarily shifted to match the pale wall behind me. Surely they wouldn't. Oh, they would, she replied. That facial expression humans call a grin growing wider. They definitely would. As I floated away, my anti-grav stabilizers wobbling slightly, I began to wonder if perhaps, just perhaps, I had made a terrible mistake. But there was no backing out now. Tomorrow, I would face this primitive Earth sport head-on. Though preferably not literally. That evening, I sat in my hoverpod, neural processors humming as I accessed the university's sports archives. Computer, I commanded, display historical footage of this rugby phenomenon. Start with basic tactical analysis. The holoscreen flickered to life, showing what appeared to be a ritual battle formation. Two groups of massive humans, bent forward, locked together in what the commentary called a scrum. Pause playback, I ordered. Computer, explain term scrum. Scrum, a method of restarting play, where 8 players from each team lock together and push against each other to gain possession of the ball. My exoskeleton tingled uncomfortably. 8 players? Pushing against each other? That can't be right. Computer, show force measurements. The numbers appeared on screen. My third eye widened in disbelief. Those calculations must be wrong. No sensible species would voluntarily experience that kind of pressure. Computer, compare to Jovian pressure wrestling. Rugby scrum forces exceed Jovian pressure wrestling by 17%. All 4 of my hearts stopped momentarily. But Jovian wrestlers have reinforced titanium bones. I shakily ordered the playback to continue. The scrum collapsed, the ball emerged, and then chaos. Pure, beautiful, terrifying chaos. Humans running, passing that oddly shaped ball backward, while other humans launched themselves with reckless abandon at the ball carrier. Computer, explain term tackle. Tackle, the act of stopping an opposing player by grabbing them and bringing them to the ground. And these tackles are permitted. Affirmative. As long as the tackle is below shoulder height and the tackler attempts to wrap their arms around the opponent. I watched in horrified fascination as the tackles kept coming. No force fields, no impact dampeners, just flesh, bone, and sheer determination. My color-changing skin had settled into a queasy purple. Computer, show medical statistics for professional rugby players. The list that appeared made my stomach acids curdle. Broken bones, dislocated joints, torn ligaments. And these humans voluntarily did this, for fun. A message notification popped up on my screen. Professor Blackwood had sent coordinates for a local rugby club, along with a note thought you might want to interview some veterans of the sport. They're expecting you. My scholarly integrity battled briefly with my sense of self-preservation. Unfortunately, integrity won. The rugby club turned out to be a building that looked as old as some space debris, with photos covering the walls of mud-covered humans grinning through blood-stained teeth. I found 3 veterans of the sport sitting at the bar, each built like a small combat vessel. Ah, you must be the alien scholar, the largest one boomed, slapping me on the back with enough force to make my stabilizers glitch. Name's Big Mike. These are Tiny and Beast. I looked at the one called Tiny, who appeared to be the size of a standard cargo container, and Beast, who made Tiny look small. My translator struggled to find appropriate words. Yes, hello. I'm conducting research on your fascinating sport. Perhaps you could explain some terms I've encountered. For instance, what is a ruck? The 3 exchanged glances and grinned. Best way to learn about a ruck is to experience one, Big Mike said. But essentially, it's when you're on the ground with the ball, and players from both teams stand over you and try to push each other away to get possession. Stand. Over you. Yeah, mate, boots and all. My translator must be malfunctioning. Boots? You mean while a player is on the ground? Character building Beast rumbled. Nothing like having a few studs rake across your back to wake you up. And this is legal. As long as you're trying to play the ball, Tiny said cheerfully. Want to see my scar collection? I quickly changed the subject. What about this term mall? Beautiful thing. The mall. Big Mike sighed nostalgically, like a scrum but moving. Everyone grabbing, pushing, trying to stay on their feet while driving forward. Had my nose broken 6 times in malls. Best times of my life. My exoskeleton was starting to feel very inadequate, and you all still have full brain function. They laughed, that booming human laugh that seemed to come from their entire body. Mostly Beast grinned, though Tiny here sometimes forgets what year it is after a big hit. That only happened twice, Tiny protested. Or was it 3 times? What year is it again? They laughed harder. I felt my survival protocols screaming for attention. Tell me, I ventured, about this welcome tackle tradition. The room went quiet. 3 pairs of eyes focused on me with predatory intensity. Ah, Big Mike said softly. Special moment, that is. Team's way of saying hello. You'll find out tomorrow. But surely, given my alien physiology. Don't worry, Beast rumbled. Doc says your exoskeleton's rated for impact. Probably. Probably. Yeah, and the hospital's right around the corner, Tiny added helpfully. They've got a great concussion ward. Very experienced with rugby injuries. I thanked them weakly and floated toward the exit, my anti-grav stabilizers trembling slightly. One more thing, Big Mike called after me. When they ask you to sing the team song afterward, make sure you know all the words. Team. Song. Oh yes, Beast grinned. It's tradition. New players have to sing solo, in front of everyone, after their welcome tackle. I fled into the night, my usually pristine neural processors overwhelmed with terrifying visions of scrums, rucks, mauls, and welcome tackles. As I zoomed home, I began composing what I felt might be my last will and testament. Computer, I whispered once safely in my hover pod, show me the team song lyrics. The words that appeared on my screen made all 3 of my eyes widen in horror. Humans actually sang about their injuries. With pride? Tomorrow was going to be a very, very long day. Recording entry 48, universal date 3479.3. Location Eden Park Stadium, Auckland, New Zealand. My voice trembled slightly as I recorded my observations. Around me, 60,000 humans packed the stadium, creating a wall of sound that made my sensitive audio receptors buzz despite their dampeners. The energy in the air was almost visible, like the plasma storms of my home world. The upcoming contest, I continued recording, is apparently one of Earth's most significant sporting events, the All Blacks versus the British Lions. The pre-game ritual known as ticket scanning and security check was surprisingly primitive, though the guard did seem concerned about my third arm. I paused my recording as another wave of sound swept through the crowd. The Lions team had emerged onto the field, wearing red uniforms that reminded me of solar flares. They were massive. Even from my carefully chosen seat near the top of the stadium, I could see the ripple of muscles that would put Martian gravity lifters to shame. The human next to me, I noted, is explaining that these are not even the largest rugby players. They are, apparently, the fast ones. But then the stadium went dark, and my processors nearly crashed from the sudden surge of electrical energy in the crowd. On my other side, Zazzle's scales were flashing like a malfunctioning quantum computer. "They're coming," someone shouted. The All Blacks. The stadium speakers began playing what my database identified as traditional war music. And then they appeared, the All Blacks. Dressed in their legendary black uniforms, they looked like a squad of elite combat units. The crowd's roar reached new decibel levels that shouldn't have been possible for organic beings. "What's happening now?" Zazzle squeaked as the All Blacks formed a V-shaped pattern. The human next to us grinned. "Just watch. It's the Haka." What followed defied all logical analysis. The All Blacks began a synchronized display of shouting, slapping, and aggressive posturing that set off every danger sensor in my exoskeleton. My survival protocols tried to activate emergency teleportation 3 times before I managed to override them. By the cosmic void, I whispered. They're challenging their opponents through ritualistic combat dancing. The lions stood in a line, facing the Haka with expressions that mixed respect with their own battle readiness. The atmosphere in the stadium was now denser than a neutron star's core. Then the game began, and I learned what true controlled chaos looked like. The kickoff sent the ball spinning high into the air, its irregular shape making its trajectory impossible to calculate. Players launched themselves skyward to catch it, colliding midair with forces that would shatter most spaceship hulls. Note for research, I recorded shakily, humans appear to have evolved some form of natural impact resistance previously unknown to science. The first scrum nearly made me float out of my seat in sympathetic anxiety. 8 humans from each team, locked together, pushing with enough force to move small planetary bodies. The sound of their collision echoed through the stadium like thunder. The fascinating aspect I found myself recording with growing excitement is the strategic complexity underlying the apparent brutality. The ball must be passed backward to go forward, creating a counterintuitive tactical layer that, oh my cosmic creators. My recording broke off as a Lions player was lifted completely off the ground and what humans around me were casually calling a big hit. He bounced once, rolled, somehow maintained possession of the ball, and got back up as if being ragdolled through the air was a minor inconvenience. The game flowed with a rhythm I was starting to understand. The brutal poetry of the tackles, the strategic placement of kicks, the raw power of the mauls. Each impact made me wince, but I couldn't look away. Then came a moment that would be forever burned into my neural processors. The All Blacks had the ball near their own try line. The Lions' defense was charging up, leaving seemingly no space. The human next to me grabbed my arm with anticipation. "Watch this," he said. "That's Thunderbolt Tommy with the ball. He's magic." I didn't understand what magic had to do with rugby, but then I saw it. The all-black player named Thunderbolt Tommy did something that broke at least 3 laws of physics. A step, a swerve, a burst of speed that my sensors couldn't track, and suddenly he was through a gap that hadn't existed a microsecond before. The stadium erupted. Thunderbolt Tommy sprinted down the field, Lions players converging on him like heat-seeking missiles. He passed the ball just before impact backward, always backward to a teammate who passed it again. The ball moved across the field in a series of lightning exchanges. The coordination, I found myself shouting over the crowd's roar, the spontaneous organization. It's like watching a quantum probability matrix collapse into perfect order. The final pass went to an all-black wing who dove for the corner of the end zone. 2 Lions hit him simultaneously. The ball carrier's body was horizontal, 2 meters off the ground, being crushed between defenders, yet somehow he got the ball down. The stadium exploded. Zazzle's scales were strobing through colors I didn't know existed, and I realized I was floating a meter off my seat, all 3 arms raised in celebration. Remarkable, I recorded, trying to regain my academic detachment. The levels of skill, courage, and controlled aggression display a sporting sophistication I had not previously. A massive tackle near our section of the stadium cut off my recording. The impact was so loud it made my stabilizers fritz. Both players got up, patted each other on the back, and rejoined the game. The rest of the match passed in a blur of incredible moments. By the final whistle, I had filled 3 neural storage units with observations, and my understanding of human sports had undergone a complete paradigm shift. As the crowds began to leave, I remained in my seat, still processing what I'd witnessed. The human next to me paused before leaving. "First rugby match?" he asked with a knowing smile. "Yes," I admitted. "I am a sports historian. I thought I understood athletic competition, but this was something else, right?" he grinned. "Just wait until you actually play it." My colors went pale again as I remembered tomorrow's training session. Somehow, after watching this display of controlled violence and tactical brilliance, the prospect of my welcome tackle seemed even more terrifying. "Don't worry," he said, patting my shoulder. "They usually go easier on beginners, usually." As I floated out of the stadium, my academic mind was already composing theories about the relationship between rugby and human social development. My survival protocols, however, were frantically searching for legal ways to avoid tomorrow's training session. But underneath all that, a small part of me was actually looking forward to it. Perhaps that was the most terrifying realization of all. Recording entry 49, Universal date 3479.4. Location Auckland Rugby Club Training Ground. Today I, Praxx Nimbleflick, must formally revise several of my previous academic positions regarding human sports. My earlier statements about their primitive nature were incoming. My recording cut off as a human mountain named Big Trevor charged toward me. Time seemed to slow down as my neural processors calculated escape trajectories, none of which were possible with my anti-grav stabilizers locked to Earth normal. The impact, when it came, redefined my understanding of physics. Good attempt at the tackle, mate Big Trevor helped me up from the grass-covered ground. You only bounced 3 meters that time. Getting better. I tried to respond, but my translator was still recalibrating from the hit. Around the field, other players were running drills that looked like choreographed combat maneuvers. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pitch, and the grass was wet with what humans called dew, making everything slightly more treacherous. Right then Coach Harrison called out, his voice carrying across the field. Let's see what our alien friend has learned. Praxx, you're going to try running the ball. Everyone else, welcome tackle time. My chromatophores went into panic mode, creating patterns that hadn't been seen since the Great Nebula Crisis. The entire team lined up, grinning those terrifying human grins. But I've only been training for 4 hours, my translator squeaked. Best way to learn, Coach Harrison tossed me the ball. Run toward that try line. Try not to die. Looking back, I realized that what happened next was a moment of temporary insanity. Perhaps the repeated impacts had damaged my logic circuits. Because instead of activating my emergency beacon, I tucked that odd-shaped ball under my third arm and ran. The world became a blur of motion and impact. I swerved around Big Trevor, ducked under Tiny's reaching arms, and somehow spun away from Beast's grasp. My xenobiologists back home would never believe how my exoskeleton held up. Then I saw a gap in the defensive line, just like Thunderbolt Tommy had found in the match. My processors calculated the angles, adjusted for wind resistance, and wham! 3 humans hit me simultaneously from different directions. My sensor array recorded the impact for a full nanosecond before shorting out. The ball went flying, my stabilizers failed, and I'm fairly certain I temporarily achieved faster than light travel. When my systems rebooted, I was lying on my back, staring at the Earth's single sun. The entire team was standing over me, faces showing concern mixed with respect. That Coach Harrison said, helping me up, was properly brilliant. Haven't seen a step like that since Thunderbolt Tommy was a rookie. But I lost the ball, my translator warbled. Yeah, but you had to go. Beast slapped my back, making my stabilizers fritz again. No fear. That's rugby spirit right there. Something strange was happening to me. Despite my systems reporting multiple warnings, despite the grass stains on my exoskeleton, despite everything, I felt oddly elated. Now then, Big Trevor grinned. Time for the team song. My memory bank suddenly recalled the horrifying lyrics I'd studied. But before I could protest, the team hoisted me onto their shoulders, and I found myself carried to the clubhouse. 2 hours later, I sat in the club's recovery room, ice packs on various parts of my anatomy, recording my final observations of the day. I must acknowledge a significant error in my previous analyses of human sports. What I mistook for primitive simplicity is, in fact, a profound celebration of what makes them uniquely human, their ability to turn physical limitations into challenges to overcome, their transformation of pain into shared experience there. "Oi, Praxx," Tiny called out. "Stop being all academic and come have a victory protein shake. You've earned it." I paused my recording, looking around the room. These humans, who had spent the morning trying to turn me into a quantum particle spread across multiple dimensions, were now treating me like family. They were comparing bruises like medals, sharing stories of great matches past, and already planning next week's training. You know what my translator conveyed my growing smile. I believe I will. Later that evening, floating slightly crookedly back to my pod, I made one final recording. Addendum to previous entries, the true genius of rugby lies not in its rules or techniques, but in how it reveals the magnificent absurdity of the human spirit. They have created a sport that turns chaos into art, pain into celebration, and strangers into brothers. I paused, considering my next words carefully. Also, I have signed up for next week's training session. My xenobiologist thinks I'm insane. My survival protocols have filed multiple formal protests, and my exoskeleton needs significant repairs. But I believe I'm beginning to understand why humans say rugby isn't just a sport. It's a way of life. Though I still think they're completely crazy. Perhaps that's why I like them so much. Recording entry 50, universal date 3479.5. Location Earth's Intergalactic University of Sports Sciences, final presentation day. The lecture hall was packed. News of my rugby adventure had spread across campus, drawing students from all departments. Even the Quantum Chess Club had suspended their weekly Paradox tournament to attend. I floated to the front of the room, my anti-grav stabilizers still slightly misaligned from yesterday's training session. Professor Blackwood sat in the front row, that familiar human expression on her face. Fellow scholars, I began, activating my presentation hologram. I stand, or rather float, before you today to present my findings on the Earth sport known as rugby. But first I must make a confession. My chromatophores shifted to the traditional color of academic humility, a sort of embarrassed mauve. I was wrong. The gasp from the alien students was loud enough to trigger the room's seismic sensors. Zazzle's scales turned pale with shock. In the history of intergalactic academia, no senior scholar had ever admitted to being wrong about anything. Rugby is not primitive. It is not simple. It is, in fact, one of the most sophisticated expressions of sporting culture I have ever encountered. I played my recording of the All Blacks match. The alien students watched in stunned silence as humans crashed into each other with gleeful abandon. Note the complete absence of technological assistance I pointed out. No neural enhancers, no gravity controls, no probability manipulators, just pure physical skill, tactical thinking, and what humans call heart. But surely a tentacled student waved an appendage, their medical technology. Observe, I switched to footage of my own training session. The class watched in horror as I was welcomed into the rugby fraternity via multiple high-speed collisions. As you can see, I survived. Mostly. And more importantly, I learned. Professor Blackwood's smile grew wider as I activated my final hologram and application I had submitted that morning. I am pleased to announce that the Intergalactic Sporting Council has approved rugby as an official competitive sport. The first alien rugby union teams will begin play next season. More gasps. Then Zazzle's voice piped up, but won't that be dangerous? Extremely, I grinned, my translator perfectly conveying the human expression I'd learned. That's rather the point. And you're really going to keep playing? Another student asked. Indeed. In fact, I have been honored with the position of player coach for the new Galactic Barbarians team. We have our first match against the All Blacks next month. The room erupted in concerned murmuring. Professor Blackwood stood up, that knowing expression still on her face. And what have you learned from all this, Mr. Nimbleflick? I straightened all three of my spinal ridges. That sometimes the most primitive-looking thing can contain the deepest wisdom. That technology isn't always the answer. That humans are absolutely, wonderfully insane, and we could learn a lot from them. The professor nodded approvingly. Well then, I believe that deserves an A. And speaking of learning from humans. She reached under her desk and pulled out a familiar oval ball. The Auckland Rugby Club asked me to give you this. They've added you to their roster for the upcoming season. The ball was signed by the entire team. Someone had written to our alien brother, keep bouncing back up. Thank you, Professor, I said, my voice synthesizer getting suspiciously glitchy. Though I should warn you, several other alien sports professors have signed up for next semester's Earth sports program. Oh, she raised an eyebrow. Any particular sport catching their interest? Yes, I managed to keep my translator steady. They're all very excited about something called American football. They think it looks much safer and more sensible than rugby. Professor Blackwood's laugh echoed through the lecture hall. Oh, this is going to be fun. End recording.